Good evening and welcome to this week's episode of Northeast Truth. That's on already.
Good evening, Truthers.
Tonight I'm Simon. We've got Dean. Angie's in the background as usual. We're broadcasting live from the northeast of England on a beautiful night to all the free-thinking people of the world. Tonight we've got a real treat for you. Probably the most preeminent person in his field, Scott Tibbs, is with us tonight talking about a variety of topics. Those who keep up to speed will know that Scott is very active in telling the world what's going on with Codex Alimentarius and
Alimentarius.
Yeah. Basically, tonight Scott's going to be telling us all about Codex Alimentarius, all about chemtrails, all about a variety of things. Dean's going to be in on the conversation with me, as usual. So, are you there, Scott?
I am, thank you.
Hello and welcome to Northeast Truth.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be on your program.
Great stuff. Right, well, the first thing, can you just tell us a little bit about the organisation that you're linked with, Scott? I believe it's called National Health Federation. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes. No, you have it absolutely right. Excuse me. The National Health Federation is the world's oldest health freedom organization for consumers. We've been in existence for a little over 55 years, and we have been quite active in fighting on many different fronts for the individual's right to choose for himself or herself what he or she wants to do with their body in terms of what they consume and what they take, because there are so many people out there who want to tell us what to do, what we can't do, who want to coerce us down a certain path or prevent us from taking certain things that would help us. And we're just out there to protect that right, whether it's on vaccinations, whether it's water fluoridation, whether it's vitamin and mineral food supplements, whether it's the right to go to an alternative healthcare doctor, be it homeopathic or otherwise, herbalist or the like. We've been out there fighting for that, for alternative availability of treatments and prevention for all these years. And as such, we are the only organization, health freedom organization, to have a seat at the Codex Alimentarius table. And this is the international body that's establishing guidelines for foods and food supplements. And we're the only ones there quite often talking out, defending the consumer rights.
Yeah, absolutely. Just for some of our listeners who aren't completely up to speed with it, essentially, then Codex Alimentarius is the forerunner of legislation, you might say, to take over sovereignty over what we can and can't eat ourselves. If you like, they're attempting to take that right off us.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. What?
Well, I was just saying that it seems to me as essentially what it boils down to is that there's a movement towards taking over the right to manage our own health from us and in the hands of the state. Would that be right?
Yes, that's absolutely right. And what I've noticed over the years, and NHF has been attending these Codex Alimentarius Commission and committee meetings since the mid-1990s, and then we obtained our own seat at the table back in the early part of this decade, is this increasing attempt to control all our choices, both in foods and in medicines. But Codex, just your listeners should understand, Codex Alimentarius is a Latin word or phrase, I should say, that just means food code, codex for the code, and alimentarius for food. So it only concerns itself with food. However, we see this effort going on elsewhere. It's just that Codex Alimentarius is more like a template that they are test running for total food and medicinal control throughout the world. So what it is in a nutshell is this is an international body that was started in the early 60s by the United Nations organizations, the World Health Organization and the Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO and the WHO. And what they did is they created an entity called the Codex Alimentarius Commission that meets alternately in Rome and Geneva, and in turn gave birth to, at this point, some 27 different committees that deal with all sorts of different things from natural mineral waters to food additives to food labeling to the main one that NHF is interested in, which is the Nutrition and Foods for Special Dietary Uses committee that is hosted in Germany. Each country, by the way, that's a country delegate, member delegate of Codex, they will, at least many of them or some of them, will host a particular committee, and then they'll provide the chairman or the chairwoman. They also will provide the meeting place and select the city where the committee meets. And in this case, the Nutrition Committee, the German government is the host government for that committee. The Canadian government's the host government for the Food Labeling Committee. The Dutch government is the host government for the Contaminants in Food Committee. The American government is the host government for the Food Hygiene Committee, and so on. I could, keep going, but you get the general idea. And then at these meetings, just to give your listeners an idea, the main delegates, of course, they're the directors of the meeting. You have the chairman or the chairwoman at the top, along with the Codex staff and a WHO person and an FAO person. But down in the well of the meeting room, you will have the country member delegates from A to Z, which is essentially Albania to Zimbabwe, and all the countries in between. And keep in mind, Codex at this point, its membership constitutes 99% of the world's population. So you have a quite full room there. But when you think of these delegates, and the UK delegate attends these meetings as well, they're always there, not always vocal, because your voice is suppressed by the fact that the EU representative speaks out for the EU member delegates. So very rarely will the UK delegate speak out, but occasionally I do hear him or her speak out. Nevertheless, these people are all bureaucrats. They're all functionaries. They have about as much interest in health freedom as you do in flying to the moon on gossamer wings. Yeah. So what they do is they take a bureaucratic mindset to this, which is control, which is let's create a whole heap of rules and regulations to make sure the consumer is safe. I mean, I'm putting it in the best light, by the way. Yeah. Let's make sure the consumer is safe. I think there's a more nefarious reason for all of this, but they think that on their watch, if something goes wrong, who's going to get the blame? They will. But if they take the consumer and they handcuff him, and then they put him in a straitjacket, and then they shove him into a closet, lock the door, and then they put alarms on the house, and then they station police all around it, nothing can happen, and the consumer will be safe. But of course, what kind of a life is that? Who wants to live like that? No one in their sane mind would want to live like that. So the NHF is often, if I can be so immodest, the sane voice at these meetings to say, look, you can heap all the regulations you want in the world, but regulations have a cost. People think they're cost-free. Oh, you add this on, but how many people are dissuaded from taking that natural supplement, for example? How many people are encouraged to go take the dangerous drug instead? How many people don't have the money because they have been taxed to death, and yet the National Health Services will provide it for £1. But if I go to the Boots shop or I go to the health food store, it will cost me £40. Well, I'll take the £1 drug that's dangerous instead of spending the £40 on the preventative. So what they've done is they've effectively cost-priced people out of taking prevention, and they've redirected them into doing the dangerous drugs that kill in the U.S. The drugs, and I'm talking legal drugs, not illegal drugs, Properly licensed medical doctors, properly licensed hospitals kill 1 million Americans a year. It's the most dangerous thing you can do. Is go to a doctor, go to a hospital, and take a drug. It will really increase your chances of dying.
Well, there's an intimate relationship between Codex and the pharmaceutical corporations. I mean, I've heard of cases where they've banned certain vegetables or fruits which have medicinal qualities, or suggested that they be labelled as a pharmaceutical product, in which case you need to be licensed for pharmaceuticals to sell them.
Yeah.
You know, is that part of it?
Right. Yeah, well, no, that's very true.
You've got a situation where, with genetically modified food, you can remove certain vitamins and minerals from the natural product. And then if you can only get those by prescription, they've essentially got control of everybody's health. You know, some of the vitamins are absolutely essential to cognitive function, for instance. If you can closely control access to that vitamin, you can essentially have the entire population as clever or as stupid as you want them to be by controlling the access to the vitamin.
Yeah, that's a very important point, and your listeners should be aware that the safety record of vitamin mineral food supplements is really unparalleled. If you look at the statistics, and these are government statistics, look at the least likely risk of death. The least likely risk of death is that you're going to be walking around in a field in Yorkshire and you're going to be hit on the head by a meteorite and killed. That's the lowest risk of death. The highest risk of death, by the way, is consuming a properly licensed drug and and being admitted into a properly licensed hospital. But anyway, let's go back down to the bottom. So you have the 3 least risky incidents of dying. So the lowest is meteorites. The number 3 from the bottom is your risk of death from falling off a horse, from being stung by a bee, or by being hit by a lightning bolt while you're walking through that Yorkshire field. So that's the third. So guess what the second one is? The second least risk, that is, it's riskier than being hit by a meteorite on your head, but it's less risky than being stung by a bee and dying, or falling off a horse and dying, and that's taking a food supplement. That is taking a food supplement. And this is the sort of thing that these morons, and I apologize to morons, but I don't think there are any of them listening, but for insulting them. But this is the sort of mentality that these morons have, where they're spending millions, tens of millions of pounds to control something that is less dangerous than being stung by a bee. And yet they're spending all this. So why are they spending the money? They're spending it because this is the competition. And in the age-old Anglo-Saxon tradition, if you can't win in the free marketplace, what do? You go running, crying to the government, and you plead, consumer protection. We need these laws in place, these regulations in place to protect the consumers from these untested, these unapproved. God, they aren't approved by bureaucrats. Can you imagine that? Vitamin supplements, and because they're so incredibly dangerous, they're untested. They don't need to be tested because we've been consuming them for tens of thousands of years in our diet, and we don't need it like we do a drug that comes off the press yesterday, or melamine that's introduced into our diet. So if these idiots would wake up and put their attention where it's really needed, that is saving people from being killed in hospitals or through the National Health Service system, then they'd be putting their money where it will do some good instead of doing a lot of bad, where they scare people away from something that's safe into something that's dangerous. These people are actually very dangerous people who are trying to do this, exceedingly dangerous.